Well, good evening. Not exactly how I want to uh, start a new series off in quarantine, but just so everybody knows, we're doing okay. And Kanda tested positive today, and so she's quarantining. So just be safe to keep you guys safe as our extended family. I'll be quarantining for the rest of this week, and so anyway, just keep us in your prayers, and we love you guys so much. And I do want to start a new series out this week, and so if you have your Bibles and turn with me, we're going to be studying through the book of Ruth. And what an amazing book to study through of redemption and struggle, and how God sometimes uses our struggle in life and uses the things that we have in life to really cause us to be patient, and not only just be patient, but also if we are patient, then how that we can truly thrive and be fulfilled in Him, and then watch how He continues to bless us and how that takes place. And so we're going to start in Ruth chapter 1, and I want to start reading and verse 1, and then we'll dive into the study. So join me, if you would, in Ruth chapter 1. And so I want to read here. It says, "Now it came about in the days when the judges governed, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The name of this man was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. Now they entered the land of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And they took for themselves Moabite women as wives. And the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the women were bereaved, and her 2 children and her husband. Then she arose with her daughter-in-laws, and that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So she departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughter-in-laws with her, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi and her 2 daughter-in-laws, Go, return each of you to her mother's house, and may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. And may the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." And then she kissed them, and they and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, but we will surely return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight, and also bear sons, would you go therefore and wait that they grow until they are grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me." You know, I think as I was reading through this and studying through this today and some yesterday, of describing a time in my life or even in your life when things just didn't go exactly the way that you expected them to go. And there's so many things in life in my life for sure, and I guarantee you in yours, if you go back and you think and look, that just didn't go according to the way that you had them planned, according to the way that you thought that they should go. And maybe it's a random job that you got ends up turning out to be a dream career, or maybe you were married and just like Naomi and Ruth and Oprah, that you lost that spouse and it was completely unexpected, or maybe you discovered. I remember a story kind of like this when Kenda and I we were pregnant with Hannah, and the doctor had actually told us. They said, well, she was actually a triplet, and the other two babies didn't form, and we lost those two babies. But those are things that were completely unexpected, and we were expecting to have a child, and there was a possibility that it could have been three, and so there's just all kinds of things that happen in life that are just completely unexpected, that happen to us, and or don't go according to the way that we think they should have gone, the way that we think that they should have been planned out. And we're in these moments, in these things that tend to not go the way we plan. How we respond, how it is that we respond to those moments, is going to say a lot about, one, who we are. It's going to say a lot about our spiritual health. It's going to our spiritual maturity. It's going to say a lot about who we are. And I say that also saying that it doesn't mean that it's not going to hurt. It doesn't mean that it's not going to sting. It doesn't mean that we're not going to be upset or even angry. As we're going to find out in the story just a little farther into it, of how Naomi becomes very bitter and becomes very angry in the fact that she had lost not just only her husband, but she had lost her two sons, her life. It did not turn out exactly like she expected, and so we find even in some of that bitterness, but in that bitterness we find how God is working in advance on something even greater, something even bigger. And so we're going to find that out in this particular story. I do want to set up just kind of where we're at here in the book of Ruth. Just as it said in these first few verses, it's necessary to know the background. The background is in the time of the judges. And so the time of the judges is that after Israel had conquered the promised land, they had come in, they had taken over the promised land. The Israelites continued to fall into sin. They continued to fall in to where they were not being obedient to the commands of God. They were not being obedient to what He was calling them to do. And so in the midst of that, God would, the people would cry out, and God would send a judge to come in and kind of help get them back on the right track. And we see that if you go and read through the book of Judges, you'll see that the judge after judge after judge, and some were great judges and some were not, but they would get Israel back on track. But then as soon as they would get Israel back on track, they would then rebel again against God. And so we find here in the book of Ruth, we find this story in the middle of part of the Judges. And so part of the judgment of God in this particular story was there was a huge famine going on in the land. There was this massive, huge famine that was taking place, and because of this famine, Elimelech, which was Naomi's husband, tries to solve the problem. He wants to solve the problem, and solving the problem, he moves his family to Moab. Now, understanding the place of Moab was known as this place of just Sin City. I don't know how else to say it other than it was considered to be a place of Sin City. And for a while, God had forbidden any of Israelites to marry out of Moab because of the paganistic type gods that they worshipped, and because of the evil and the sin that was in it. And so Ruth here, opens up in the middle of this famine. The book of Ruth here opens up right in the midst of this famine. It was a desperate attempt here of Elimelech, that he's trying to provide for his family and his his wife Naomi and his two sons. There's a couple things I want us to understand, is especially biblical times. There's a lot of meaning in the names of people, and so when a name was given to a child, when a name was given to a person, typically that name meant something. There was some kind of a meaning behind it. And Elimelech means, it actually means here, I want to make sure I say this is right, is that it actually means God is my king. And that's what his name actually meant. But one of the things that we also know here is that he actually didn't live his life as God being his king. And he didn't live his life of that. The two sons that we know that Naomi and Elimelech had is Mahlon, actually means sick. And here's the other one, is that Chilion, that name actually means death or to die. And so we have here Elimelech, the husband, with two sons that their names mean sick and death, sick and die, or sick and die. And then you have Naomi. Naomi's name actually means sweet and pleasant. So you have Elimelech, his name meaning my king is my God, or my God is my king. And then you have the two sons mean sick and die, and then you have sweet and pleasant. And here they go, they're trying to make this life work. They're trying to survive in the middle of this famine. And right in the middle of this famine, and them trying to make a break and trying to make a way to survive, Naomi loses everything. Her two sons had met, as we find in the story, Oprah and Ruth, and they become the daughter-in-laws. And so all three of these ladies become widowed almost at the same time, within days, weeks, maybe months of each other. We don't know exactly the timeline here, but it was very recent from each other. And so here in this particular story, and Ruth opens up here in this famine and talking about how they moved to Moab. Naomi then talks about, I want to move back to my people. I want to go back to where I'm from. Now, Ruth and Ophrah were from Moab. Naomi was from Judah. And when she says, I'm going back to my people, Ruth and Ophrah said, we want to go with you. Now, they would have not actually been, I would say, not welcome, but you have to think that they're Jewish. Naomi is Jewish, and Ruth and Ophrah are Moabites. We know a little bit of the history of the Moabites, that they were considered to be evil, and the Jewish people were not supposed to marry into the Moabites because of their paganistic. And so here, Naomi says, no, you don't need to go with me. I can't provide you more sons. I'm going to be widowed probably for the rest of my life. I'm going to be miserable for the rest of my life. There's no sense in you following me. I can't provide for you. How are you going to meet anyone in my home country and where I'm from. You need to just stay here. And something interesting about this is one of the things that Naomi says towards the end here in verse, I believe it's in verse 13. And she says this, she says, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Talking about if she had more kids. Are you going to wait till they're grown? Probably not. These are already grown women. They wouldn't wait for them to marry. And she says, no, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you. She's talking about, listen, I can't have any more children. I'm older in age. For me to be able to remarry at my age, have children at my age, it's so much harder. She says, but for you, it's so much easier. You're younger. You have, they're still in their childbearing years. They're still, those kind of things. They could still meet somebody, be happy, and those kind of things. But something interesting that Naomi says is she says this to the two girls, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. This is an interesting part for us in this particular story, because in this moment, Naomi, I'm not saying she's having a pity party, but in this moment, Naomi is looking for a place to put her blame. She's hurting, she's mourning, she's bereaving the loss of her husband and her sons, and she's lonely, and so she's looking somewhere to put that blame, looking somewhere to put that hurt. And she says, listen, God's hand's against me. You don't need to be with me. You don't want to be with me. God's hand's against me. You need to go and find something else. You need to go and go somewhere else. And so I want you to look and see also, I want to backtrack for just a second here in the book of Ruth. And in this particular part of the story, and again, we have to realize that we're in the midst of this famine. We're in the midst of the judges. We're in the midst of all these different things. The change in the famine isn't the most, God has allowed this to happen because of the disobedience of the children of Israel. And so, I mean, there is here this part of this story that they have to take ownership of, that the reason why we're in this situation is because of us. And God is not passively. I want to make sure I say this too about Naomi, is that God isn't passively watching Naomi suffer. Okay, Naomi obviously is suffering. We read that. She's looking for that place to blame. She's lost her husband. She's lost both kids. She's now left with two daughter-in-laws that she don't know what to do with. She wants to kind of send them off. But God is not just simply, passively just watching her suffer. We have to understand that, especially as we move forward through this story, is that God is actively working in Naomi. God is not only working in Naomi, but he's actively working in restoring her. Now, this is tough for us to understand the restoration process, because we get so caught up in the restoration process of, we want God to restore us. We want God to make us right. We want God to do these kind of things. But the problem is that sometimes we want God to do it in our timeline. We want God to do it the way that we want God to do it. We get frustrated because God allowed us to be in that situation in the first place. And so in that restoration process, there's a lot of emotions and frustration and anger and hurt and those kind of things. And so we get to that point and we just get frustrated, but know that just like God was working in Naomi and her situation, is working in us too. So I want you to see in verse 8 and verse 9, something that Naomi does do for her for her daughter-in-laws, is that she says a prayer for them, or she gives a desire for them, and that desire for them is this, as she says, so she departed from the place where she was and her 2 daughter-in-laws with her, and they went out on their way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughter-in-laws, "Go and return each of you to your mother's house, that the Lord may deal with you kindly, as having dealt with the dead with me." And so she tells them, my desire for you is that you go back home, that you find love. You go back into your parents' homes, your mother's homes. You find love again. You don't need to be with me. You don't need to be stuck to me. My sons are gone. Your husbands are gone. There's no sense in you being with me. And so she goes on. In fact, the word that she actually uses here is hesed, and which means dust off the Hebrew. And so in saying that, and dust off the Hebrew, what she's saying is that there's no need in you staying with me. Dust this off and move on and go and find love. And so look here we haven't got to these verses yet, but I also want you to see something that that's going on in the midst of this story with Ruth and Naomi and Ophrah. So look here in verse 14. Something happens here that is amazing. And it reads like this. It says, "And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Then she said, 'Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law.'" So we see here Ophrah kisses her mother-in-law, and then she goes back home. But Ruth did not. Ruth stayed vulnerable. Ruth stayed also, it uses the word clung. She stayed vulnerable to her mother-in-law. She stayed close to her mother-in-law. She was dedicated to her mother-in-law and the things that her mother-in-law, in fact, she uses the word, Naomi tells Ruth, "Go back with your sister-in-law and worship the gods that you grew up worshiping." But Ruth didn't want to do that. Ruth wanted to continue to stay with Naomi and continue to worship the gods that she worshiped, that her people worshiped, that her husband worshiped. She wanted to go back and be a part of that lifestyle. So continue to read on in verse 16. It says, "But Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I'll lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me.'" This is dedication. She pretty much just said, "Listen, you're family. You're a part of me. I'm a part of you. Wherever you go, I go. Whatever you do, I do. We're going to go through this life together. You are family." And she goes on and she ends up saying this in verse 18, and then we'll finish up here from today. It says, "And when she saw that she was determined," listen to that word, determined, "to go with her, she said no more to her." There was this understanding. She wants to be with me. She wants to serve my God. She wants to be a part of my people. And I think this was the beginning, honestly. I think this was the beginning of God working and beginning to actively work in the life of Naomi by giving her Ruth. Ruth becomes an amazing woman of God. And we already see the dedication in which that she has. But here we began to see God working in the life of Naomi. And you know what strikes me about Ruth's promise to Naomi because this is a lot. I mean, think about what she's giving up. She's given up everything. Ruth is giving up absolutely everything. She's given up her family. She's given up whatever life that she had, whatever existence that she had. She's given all of that up. And that's a part of this promise in which that she's given to Naomi, and so that she's going to follow. And this is, there's a chance, she's saying, there's a chance for me to remarry. There's a chance for me to find somebody in your country that serves your God, that I would serve your God. She's leaving behind all her gods to serve Naomi's God. She's leaving behind her family to make Naomi her family. She's leaving her security in hopes of continuing to find security with Naomi in order to build a future that she has no idea what lies in front of her. Neither one of them had no idea. They're both hurting, they're both grieving, and yet they're trusting that God is going to lead them and do something great in their life, and they're going to continue to do this. Ruth promises to be faithful. You know, I think about the promise that Ruth makes here, and this is, I'll end with this, and this is the promise I think that many of us might need to really ask ourselves if we're ready to make. And the promise is this, or the dedication is this, is, are we ready to leave behind all the things that bind us, all the things that capture us, all the things that tend to hold us down? I mean, Ruth was telling Naomi she was willing to sacrifice all of her security. She was willing to sacrifice everything that she had ever known. Family, work, just the comfort of her own country, customs, to be able to follow Naomi. I relate that to our relationship with God. It's, what are we willing to sacrifice? What is it that we're willing to leave behind? What is it that we're willing to give up in order to follow God in the fullest, in the greatest of ways? What are we willing to make as an ultimate sacrifice to say, you know what? It's worth it. God, I love you. God, I want to give you my all. I want to give you myself. And for many of us, that means that there's some things that we have to leave behind. For many of us, it means that there's some things that it's going to take some great sacrifice. And so I ask you that question of, what is it? What is it for you? What is it for me that God's asking us? Are we going to continue to be selfish or selfless? And so I pray that as we continue through this study, and this is just kind of an intro into this particular part of the study, I pray that as we go through this, that you're gonna hear God's amazing restoration story to Naomi, to Ruth, and you're gonna hear how God has something great for all of us, even in the midst of our trials, in the midst of circumstances, in the midst of situations, that God has something great for us. God has something wonderful for us. But are we going to be patient? Are we going to see it as God sees it? Are we going to trust, put our faith in that God has a greater plan for us? And that's exactly what Ruth does here with Naomi. She puts all of her faith and all of her trust in Naomi because of the God in which that she serves. And so I ask you, what are you going to do? I love you. Let me pray for you. Father, I thank you so much Thank you that we have technology like this, that we're able to do this even in the midst of quarantine, even in the midst of not being able to meet. That God, that you give us this amazing opportunity. Father, I do pray that you would allow this study, that you would use this amazing study to show us a great and amazing example of restoration that we can have in this life, that you do provide restoration for us. Father, when we fall, when we fail, when we mess up, when life falls apart, when we think there's nowhere else to turn, God, you're there. You're still there, even when we don't see you. Even when we feel like we can't feel you, you're still there. Even when it looks like you're not working, God, you're working. And we thank you for that. God, we love you, we praise you, and we ask it in the name of Jesus. Amen. Guys, I love you. Just please keep us in your prayers, and hopefully we'll get to see you this weekend.